Thank you. How many of you have ever been in a discussion with someone, maybe your spouse, you were winning, every rational mind in the universe knew you were winning, the Lord knew you were winning, and your spouse changed the subject? Can I see your hands? Oh, look at this. We have got it. Those of you in the viewing audience, you are free to engage in this survey as well. And we'd like to welcome our viewing audience that's joining us on the live stream. We're really glad you're here. We're going to talk in these sessions in front of us this afternoon about a topic where people love to change the subject. Instead of keeping the main thing, they change it to something else. And this is an epic problem for the pro-life cause. A number of years ago, actually several decades ago, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 suffered a catastrophic crash that killed everybody on board. And here's what happened. While they were on their approach to Miami, the flight crew noticed that there was a warning light on for the landing gear. And they became so obsessed with figuring out what was wrong with that indicator light, even though the nose gear had gone down and locked into place. We're talking a perfectly operational airplane. And the flight crew, all three in the flight deck, were so keyed in on that light, they forgot to fly the airplane. And they forgot, or didn't notice, I should say, that the autopilot had become disengaged, and they literally flew the plane into the ground trying to track down a root problem with an indicator light. We want you to leave this session today knowing how to keep the main thing the main thing. And let me tell you why that's important, men and women. You have joined us at a very unique time in our nation's history. Have you noticed that the abortion debate has heated up? Have you noticed that it almost seems like it's going viral, not just on social media and Twitter, where everything is viral, but where people are just even in regular conversations, it's almost like they don't know how to converse with one another anymore. It's heating up like crazy. Why is that? I'm going to tell you why. The abortion debate is not about a surgical procedure. It's not about choice. It's not about trusting people to make their own personal decisions. Rather, it's about a fundamental worldview question that is dividing this nation right down the middle. And here's what that question is. Who counts as one of us? This is why you see states like New York, Illinois, Vermont, Connecticut rushing to liberalize abortion to the furthest extremes, even refusing to protect children who survive abortion procedures. This is why you see other states going the other way. Georgia, Ohio, Missouri, Alabama, Louisiana, passing legislation to protect unborn humans. Why is this so contentious? Because for the first time, the federal courts are signaling that they are going to release the abortion issue at some level back to the states to decide for themselves. What happened in Roe versus Wade is one branch of the federal government, the federal courts, co-opted the abortion issue from the legislative and executive branches of government, leaving them almost no say in the issue. Now what we're seeing is a signaling from the courts that though they may not reverse Roe, though they may not gut it entirely, they do indicate that they're going to return some of the power back to the states. When that happens, men and women, you and I in our individual states are going to have to step up and become pro-life apologists. It is going to be on us to make that case for life. And here's what's going to happen today. In just a few minutes, Megan Almon is going to come up, and she's going to teach you how to make a case for life on hostile turf. I will then come back after our break and talk about how we answer the 6 common objections that people give to the pro-life view. How do we answer these objections, and how do we do it in a way that will help you keep your thinking clear when people are throwing everything at you, including the kitchen sink? And then in the third session, we're going to do something a little unique. We're going to talk about the underlying worldviews that are in play right now on the abortion issue. Because one of the things we do is fail to engage the worldviews that drive people to abortion in the first place. There's a tendency in our culture now, even among pro-lifers, to chase down root causes of abortion. And by that, what people mean is, well, we've got to solve all the problems culturally that make women want to have abortions. We're actually going to present a different thesis. Our big problem isn't root problems. Our big problem is worldviews that drive people to consider abortion. And we'll talk about 3 of those in particular that are having a profound impact on the abortion debate right now. But before we do that, I want you to look at a short video clip that is going to bring home to all of us and remind us. Some of you have seen this clip, but it's going to bring home very clearly the gravity of the situation in front of us and why it's so important for Christians to engage this issue and be prepared to make a defense for what they believe. This short video, some of you have seen by Peter Heck, that talks about just the numerical disaster that abortion has been compared to other loss of life issues. We'll look at that, and those of you on the live stream, when that video ends, Megan will be here to make her case. But let's take a moment right now to just view this short video clip to bring into focus why we need to engage on this issue.
Right where you are, I just want you to, right there in your seats, just shut your eyes. What you're about to hear are the sounds of metal BBs striking the side of a tin can. For every BB that strikes, it represents 10,000 lives lost in the wars of America's past. 10,000 lives for every BB. This is the reality of what is occurring in your country. The American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, the conflict in Vietnam, September 11th and the War on Terror. Since 1973, the War on the Unborn Child. God help us.
Indeed. I was at a very large Catholic school in Texas yesterday and played that clip for them and sat and watched 900 high schoolers with their eyes closed listening to the video clip with their brows furrowed and the expression of pain on their faces. I saw a girl in the higher bleachers in the back even cover her ears as if she couldn't take any more of that sound. We have to get this right, you guys. There's too much at stake not to. And so to dive into how to make a case for life in a culture like ours, I'm going to start with a story, and I'm going to ask you first, who is familiar with the book You Are Special by Max Lucado? Show of hands. Several of you. Okay, for those who aren't, I'll set it up for you. This book is about a people group called the Wemmicks. Now, they're very interesting little puppet people. They're little wooden puppet people, and they live in a village, and they have an odd way of life. They spend all day, every day, watching one another. And several of the Wemmicks, as you could imagine, have all the skill sets you would want in a talented individual. They are star athletes, so they can run fast and jump high. They can do all of the acrobatic tricks. They have some who can sing well or speak well. They have some whose paint is shiny and new and beautiful to look at. And so the other Wemmicks watch those Wemmicks do their great things, and they take stickers out of a box on their belt and award those Wemmicks with gold star stickers. And so some of the Wemmicks are covered in gold stars. But some of the other Wemmicks are not as talented. In fact, our main character is one of those. His name is Punchinello. It's a strange name. I didn't come up with it, but Punchinello is his name. And Punchinello tries to do these things. He tries to run fast. He tries to jump high, but he's pretty clumsy, so he ends up falling down. Inevitably, he scratches his paint. And then when he tries to explain what happened, he ends up tripping over his words because he's not a very good speaker. And so he doesn't have a single gold star. On the contrary, Punchinello is covered in gray dot stickers. He's covered in them. And so when we find him in the beginning of the story, he doesn't want to go outside and be around the other Wemmicks. He wants to stay in his home because he's begun to believe what they have deemed him unworthy. He believes that he is unworthy. We're going to leave him there for just a little while. There's more to that story. But I want you to notice that there is a great big idea in this little bitty children's book that we need to understand. Punchinello lives in a society where some of his kind don't matter as much as others. Men and women, we live in a society where some human beings don't matter as much as others. Some human beings don't matter as much as others. This is an idea, but I've learned a thing or two about ideas. As the great Leonardo DiCaprio once said, in the film Inception, if you've seen it, I don't entirely understand that movie, nor can I really recommend it. But there is one line in that movie that he got exactly right. His character said, "An idea can be the most dangerous thing." He nailed it. An idea can be the most dangerous thing. As my friend John Stonestreet, who works with the Colson Center, but is also a fellow faculty member here at Summit, says, ideas have consequences. Dangerous ideas have victims. That's exactly right. And this idea that some human beings don't matter as much as others is not a new idea. It's been around for quite a while. You can do a brief glance at history and see other ways in which this idea has manifested, other societies that have asked the same question, who counts among us? We can go as far back as Israel under Pharaoh, that was slavery. You can fast forward to ancient Rome and see this idea manifested in any number of wicked ways. Abortion was practiced in ancient Rome, as was infanticide. Infants that were unwanted were left exposed to the elements. Fathers were allowed under Roman law to kill their adult children. And let's not even begin to discuss the travesties that took place in the arena with gladiator battles and the slaughtering of innocents for the purposes of entertainment. We can look at our nation's history, slavery once again. Also ongoing in the form of sex trafficking, another way of saying human beings are a commodity that can be used for something. And if I've got this right on the issue of abortion, as we have just heard in that video, the death toll is staggering because of a dangerous idea. This battle of ideas that we are in should be no surprise to us. Paul told us that this is the type of battle that we're in when he was defending his own ministry in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, when he said that our weapons are not weapons of the flesh. We don't carry gladiator swords, but we do have something that is divinely powerful for the tearing down of strongholds. And I think what Paul is talking about there are these sets of ideas and beliefs that people have about the world. Because he goes on to talk about these very things. He says we are to tear down arguments, lofty opinions that are raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 tells us we are to do that with gentleness and respect. But this is a battle over ideas. And our culture right now is struggling to answer these foundational worldview questions, many of which we will talk about today. One of those questions deals with the nature of truth itself. You'll hear more about that as we go throughout our time together. Is truth really true? Can we know it? Is moral truth something real, or do we just create that for ourselves? Men and women, people are answering that question. And the ideas that come as the results of those answers are playing themselves out in front of us with real-world consequences. The other question up for grabs is, what does it mean to be human? Christians, How in the world are we going to share a gospel message with a world that has forgotten who they are and what they are? What is it that makes us valuable as human beings? What is it that gives you value or rights that other people are obligated to respect? What is that thing? See, people are answering these questions too, and the ways they're answering the question results in ideas that are playing themselves out in front of us in devastating ways. So, but to talk about the issue of abortion, we have to understand that that truth question is a huge hurdle. And I just want to touch on that for a minute, because with this issue in particular, unlike other moral issues that we face, moral relativism is standing in the way of people really grasping clarity on the issue. Abortion, our nation is dying to frame as a preference kind of issue, as one that deals with what you come up with on your own. It's up to you to decide. And I will tell you this, as long as it's up to individuals to decide those things, what it is that's inside of them and whether or not it has value, then babies will continue to die, and that death rate will continue to rise. So how do we achieve clarity in a nation that has it that confused? 3 things in the time I have with you. Number 1, we're going to learn how to simplify this issue when we are talking about it. Now, don't hear me flippantly saying, oh, this is a simple issue. As someone who works in this field, I understand this is not simple in many ways. It is emotionally complex. It is psychologically complex. It can be economically and politically complex, but morally speaking, it is very, very simple. Because the entire debate over abortion hinges on a single question. We're going to learn what that question is and how to bring the conversation back there. Then we're going to answer that question in a way that may surprise some people. And finally, we're going to talk about why you matter. So my hope is that this entire presentation on how to defend the pro-life view would be one that ends up being encouraging to us all, because there is a great message underlying all of this. So to clarify and to simplify that issue, I need to tell you a story about my daughter. Her name is Neely. Now, Neely is 13 years old, but a few years ago, we were living in a log cabin in Noonan, Georgia, before we moved out here to beautiful Colorado, where my husband began working here at Summit Ministries. And my best friend, Courtney, came over to my house one day and brought her 3 little boys to play with my kids. Now, her oldest son, Micah, is one of Neely's best friends. And I also have a little boy in addition to Neely. So because it was a beautiful day and because we were eager to just sit down and catch up and have mom time, I sent all the kids into the backyard and left the door open. Now, I could hear everything that was going on, which is a necessity when you send 5 adventurous kids into the woods. But I could also not see what was going on because they were out there. So Courtney and I sat down to have coffee, which is, of course, the elixir of life if you're a mom. You know this about it. And I began to sip the coffee, and I heard the sound that every parent dreads, blood-curdling screaming coming from the backyard. Now remember, I have the only girl, and that scream was distinctly female. So I did what any good parent would do. I dropped the coffee, and just spoiler alert, that is the most tragic part of the story. And I began lunging for the back door. So I'm up and running, and as I get up from the chair and the coffee's falling, I hear my daughter continuing to scream, and then she says, "Get it off me, get it off, just kill it." So I'm in mid-lunge, and those 3 seconds from my chair to the back door, as every parent also knows, seem like some kind of strange time warp into a little eternal moment where I'm thinking to myself, kill what? What's on my kid? And let me just tell you, if there was going to be a bug with a stinger on her, I was going to help her kill it. I don't do bugs with stingers, and some of you are with me on that. Fight or flight, I'm going to fight every time. It might have been the next door neighbor's dog. Now, my next door neighbor had a Jack Russell Terrier. He was so cute. And that's all. He was vicious. He would bite, the whole ordeal. So we're going to put Ace back into his fence. We're not going to kill the dog. Could it be her brother? Now, you laugh, but my 7-year-old does not really know from one day to the next whether he actually is Wolverine or just like a normal ninja. So I've got to know because I do the laundry in the house. So the point of the whole illustration is the answer to what is it matters. It matters. It was a green lizard for all you type A's out there in our viewing audience. I understand. The lizard got out of Micah's grasp into Neely's hand, slithered out of her hand, and went up her shirt sleeve. So she wiggled around until it flew across the backyard and no animals were harmed in the making of that example. But the answer to what is it matters. Can we kill the unborn? That's the question we're grappling with when it comes to abortion. Can we kill the unborn? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, sure, if the unborn are not human beings. If it is true, as many would claim, that having an abortion is no different than clipping my fingernail or pulling a tooth, just a simple medical procedure, then I shouldn't have a problem with it. But if the unborn are human, that's different. See, we have to answer that question, what is the unborn, before we can even talk about whether or not we can kill the unborn. And the problem is that most people skip that question. And they'll go on and give you reasons as to why abortion should be legal or abortion should be allowed. And I just want to point out to you from the outset that the reasons that they give don't deal with unimportant matters. Every single one of the things I'm going to name in just a moment is important. I will often hear abortion is an issue of privacy. It's a private matter between a woman and her God or between a woman and her doctor. You have no say as to what goes on in the privacy of someone else's bedroom. That is the legal justification under the federal law. Some will say abortion is an issue of poverty. This woman can't afford to feed another child, so who are you to say that she should go through with yet another pregnancy? Some will say abortion allows women to pursue their educational goals, their careers, their dreams, without an unplanned pregnancy standing in the way of that. Abortion prevents unwanted children from being born. Why would you want someone to have a baby that nobody wants? Abortion prevents disabled children from being born who may suffer and have a poor quality of life. If we were to outlaw abortion, wouldn't women be harmed attempting to seek illegal abortions, back alley abortions? If we were to outlaw abortion, wouldn't we be imposing religion on other people? We can't do that, can we? All of these deal with important things. And the list goes on and on and on. But every single one of the justifications that I just named made the same mistake. They assumed something about the unborn, namely that the unborn are not human beings. That they're not human like you and like me. I want you to imagine for just a moment that my nephew AJ was up on stage with me. I wish he was, because he's super cute. In fact, that's the first thing that you would all agree on. He's 2 years old. He's about this tall. And that's the first thing you would notice. That's probably the cutest baby you've ever seen. See, my blue-eyed, blonde-haired brother married a beautiful woman who looks like a Mayan princess. And they made a beautiful baby. So AJ would be here, but he's undoubtedly human. You would all agree on that point. We have a 2-year-old boy standing here. Imagine that I read that same list of justifications back to you and told you that these are reasons why I ought to be allowed to kill AJ. None of you would go for that. You'd think I'd lost my mind. You'd say, no, we don't kill 2-year-olds in the name of privacy. We don't kill 2-year-olds because they're expensive. The students I speak to here at Summit are often shocked to know that we don't kill teenagers because they're expensive either. They're so relieved. Guys, we don't kill 2-year-olds when they stand in the way of something that we want. We don't kill 2-year-olds just because it seems like they're unwanted. There are orphanages around the world full of seemingly unwanted children. I think that's arguable. We don't kill 2-year-olds who are disabled. We have no problem with laws that make it harder to kill 2-year-olds in case someone might be harmed in attempting to do so. And it is no more religious to say that AJ has value and cannot be killed than to say that he doesn't. Everyone does those metaphysics, everyone. So important as they are, at the end of the day, when it comes to the abortion issue, it's not really about those things. It's about that question, what is the unborn? Is the unborn human like AJ is human? When you're in conversation with someone, you can use a technique at LTI, at Life Training Institute, that we call Trot out the toddler to demonstrate that point. You can do it as I just did it if you have a toddler in your family, or you could just simply say, if someone uses a justification such as, this woman can't afford to feed another child. You could say, hold on, just for the sake of conversation, let's say that I have a 2-year-old standing next to me. Hold out your hand about this high because it gives them something concrete to look at. And then go on and say, her family's really struggling and they can't make ends meet. In fact, her dad just lost his job a couple weeks ago. And so the family's having a hard time affording food at all. They've reached a consensus, though. They want to kill their toddler to lessen that financial burden. Do you think they should have that right? Now, I'll be real with you, that person's going to look at you like you're insane. They're going to say, no, of course not. Ask them, why not? They'll say, because the 2-year-old is human. They may say, because the 2-year-old's already a person. They may even say, that's completely different. No matter what they say, you're back to your question in the conversation. Because you can pick up on, say, oh, is it different? See, I want to know, is that 2-year-old human? Is the unborn human like that 2-year-old is human? Let's talk about that. Then we can talk about poverty, or perhaps how to help the individual that you might be referring to. Careful thinkers have to make distinctions where they need to be made. So we've got to get it back to that question, what is the unborn? Now there's good news about that question because we do have an answer to that question. And when you pose it, it's only fair for you to have an answer to give to someone. But note that this is not a religious question. I don't go to my Bible to find the answer to the question, what is the unborn? It is, however, a scientific question. So I do go to science. And there is an entire field of science dedicated to the study of embryos. The fancy word for it is embryology. The science of embryology tells us very clearly what the unborn is. I'm going to read a quote to you from an embryological textbook, The Developing Human by Keith Moore and T.V.N. Perso, who, if you go to medical school, you guys will read that, those of you who are students. Those of you who would like to go and read that, I wish you luck. You'll come out of that going, I'm not sure I pronounced every one of those words correctly, but it is a worthwhile endeavor. And it says, a zygote, which is a single-celled embryo, is the beginning of a new human being. Human development begins at fertilization, the process during which the male gamete unites with the female gamete to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. The science is very clear, and pro-lifers are not the only ones who would agree on that science that's been established. Dr. Warren Hearn, who is an abortionist himself, performs abortions, said this to a Planned Parenthood conference a few years ago in describing to other abortion doctors how to perform a particular procedure. He says, we have reached a point in this particular technology where there is no possibility of denying an act of destruction. It is before one's eyes. The sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current. Camille Paglia, a well-known feminist author, wrote this in Salon magazine back in 2008. Hence, I have always frankly admitted that abortion is murder. That is the word she chose, not the word I would always use. The extermination of the powerless by the powerful. She said abortion results in the annihilation of concrete individuals, not just clumps of insensate tissue. I mean, likewise, Naomi Wolf said the death of a fetus is a real death. To break down what that embryology said and take just a minute to unpack it, because that's important that we do that so that we understand it. What it's saying is that from the moment that fertilization happens, what we have is a living, distinct, whole human being. We know that it's alive because it fits the definition of an organism, that thing that we all learned right around middle school life science. It undergoes cellular reproduction, which is a fancy way to say that it grows. It metabolizes by turning food into energy. It responds to stimuli. Embryos have even been shown to be really, really good at wound repair, which is remarkable. It's alive. It is distinct in that it is a separate entity from its mother. It is not part of the woman's body, not like my arm is a part of my body. I mean, it is attached to her, yes, but it is not part of her. The embryo at that single-celled stage has its own unique genetic code that differs from its mother's and from its father's. In fact, something remarkable happens in that moment of fertilization. Dr. Maureen Kondik is a neurobiologist, brilliant scientist at the University of Utah. And she's often asked as a scientist, how do you know when one type of cell, in this case an egg cell, becomes a new type of cell? How do you know when that happens? She said the answer is very simple. Across the field in biology, we have one of two indicators that tell us when one kind of cell becomes another one. One of those is that it changes in the stuff that it's made up of. The fancy way of saying that would be its material composition. If it changes in its material composition, then we know we have a new cell. Another indicator is if it changes behavior, then we have a new cell. But only one of those things has to happen. And Dr. Condit goes on to explain that we can in fact know when human life begins. She said it is observable at the moment of fertilization when sperm and egg meet within 250 milliseconds. The plasma membranes of those two cells begin to merge to form a hybrid cell surface, which means that that egg cell changes in its material composition within the blink of an eye. And what we have is a brand new cell. It goes from being an egg cell that could have existed where it was for about 24 hours to being a new kind of cell that can now live upwards of, 100 years, given medical technology, because it is a human being. That's remarkable. Within 3 minutes, it meets the second indicator because it changes behavior. When the zona pellucida forms, it goes from being an egg cell that's sole job was to attract sperm to being something like the Death Star that repels them. Thank you for getting my Star Wars reference. My husband would be so proud. Distinct, living, and whole. It's a whole human being. In other words, it's not part of another human being. Just as if I could scratch my hands, several of my skin cells have just tumbled to their imminent deaths on the floor in front of me. That's a little bit gross. Many of them were already dead, but some are still alive and will die in just a minute. Now, every single one of those skin cells contains my DNA encoding, but I am not guilty of mass murder. Those cells are part of me. And their job is to contribute to the overall function of the organism that is Megan. An embryo is different in kind from any other cell, even a sperm and an egg cell, both of which are alive, but are part of another organism and contribute to that organism's overall function. The embryo, even at that single-celled stage, its parts work together towards its function. It's a whole entity in and of itself. If you'll allow me to make a distinction between a couple of things so we can understand this a little better, the embryo is not a properties kind of thing. And what I mean by that, a properties kind of thing, is something that is nothing more than a sum of its physical properties. So this table would be a prime example of a properties kind of thing. If I were to take it apart, it would cease to be a table. It would just be a pile of pieces. It came into existence over a period of time as it was put together piece by piece. But the embryo is not like that. The embryo is a substance kind of thing. It came into being all at once. It doesn't become more of its kind as time passes. Substance kinds of things mature according to their kind as time passes. Each of you is a substance kind of thing. You didn't come from an embryo, you once were an embryo. And you matured according to your time or kind as time passes, because humanity does not come in degrees. One more distinction before we move on. The embryo is not a constructed thing, like the table is a constructed thing. As I said a minute ago, it was put together piece by piece. And in an industrial society, we're often tempted to think of the embryo that way. That's why we hear language like, it's just a clump of cells. It's just a mass of tissue, as if you could add more pieces and the end product would be a baby. Think of how we've gone from terms like procreation, which is what my grandmother would have said, to what my generation exclusively calls it, reproduction. Dangerous ideas have victims. But the embryo does something that no constructed thing could ever do. See, from the time that you were an embryo, you drove your own development from within. Many of us are still developing. That's remarkable. Richard Stith is a philosopher who gives us a wonderful word picture to help us understand and realize this difference. He said, imagine that you have what is an artifact to many students, a Polaroid camera. We all know what that is, yes? Are we good? Okay, yeah. A Polaroid camera, the kind where the tab comes out, and you're in the Amazon jungle taking pictures of the scenery around you, and you go to snap a photo of what's in front of you, and as you hit that button, a black jaguar leaps out across the path, and you've captured it in your photo. Now, I am an expert on black jaguars because I watch Wild Kratts with my children. I can tell you that they are very rare, certainly beautiful, but because they're rare, there's not many photos of them in the wild. So what you have is something of value. And I want you to imagine that someone comes and looks over your shoulder and they see what you're holding. And they kind of shrug it off and they take it from your hands and they rip it in two and toss it down. Now you would be furious with them. You'd say, what are you doing? They'd say, what's the big deal? It was just a brown smudge. You'd say, no, it wasn't. I was holding a photograph of a jaguar. It was rare and beautiful and valuable. It was already there. You just couldn't see it yet because it was doing what? Developing, just like the embryo. Science has an awful lot to say about that question, what is the unborn? We have an answer to that question. But men and women, you will get to the point where you start to talk about the science and you're trying to share it, and it doesn't seem to be having any impact. Your words are not penetrating to the heart of the person that you're speaking to or to the mind. In those moments, what do we do? I think sometimes the only way to reach people's moral intuition is to show them. Show them what abortion looks like. In just a moment, I'm going to play a 1-minute video clip. Let me tell you exactly how this is going to go. This video clip is hard to look at. In fact, those of you who are viewing at home, if you have young people in the room with you, you may take this time to make adjustments as needed for what's coming. It does not show an abortion procedure being performed, but it does show you the aftermath. It shows aborted fetuses or abortion victims from early in the pregnancy through late in the pregnancy. The reason for that is that because of the way the law stands right now, abortion is legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Now, there is no narration on this clip, but there is music that plays over it. And the reason for that is if you know within your very core that this is something you do not want to see today, I respect that. And I invite you for that 1 minute to simply avert your gaze, look down, and you will not see anything you don't want to see. The music ending will let you know that the clip is done. And before we air that clip, please understand that the thing that keeps Scott and myself and our entire team talking, the thing that should keep you talking about this issue is the realization that the gospel of Christ is objectively true. That means true in the way that matters, true in the realest sense of true. It's real. And that means that there is real hope and real healing available when it comes to an issue like abortion. And I never walk into a room without knowing that I'm going to be speaking to someone who's been impacted by this issue, whether it's directly or indirectly. So for any who choose to watch, please understand that apart from Christ, we all stand on a level playing field. But because of Christ, we have great hope that is freely offered to each of us if we will just receive it and walk in it. So if you choose to watch, please watch through the lens of that gospel. Let's show the video and then we'll pick up and close the session. It doesn't get easier to watch. Scott might not know this, but the first time I saw that film, he was the speaker that night and I was in the room. And I already agreed with him. I was already pro-life. So in my mind, I wondered, why was that necessary? Why would you show me that? I already agree with you. I don't want to see that. And he told a story that night that changed my mind on that issue altogether. And I'll share the same story with you. It's a true story. It took place in 1955, and it's about a young man by the name of Emmett Till, who was 14 years old that year. He lived in Chicago, Illinois with his mother, Mamie, and one summer she sent him to Money, Mississippi by train to visit his cousins for the summer. And before he got on that train, she gave him a gift, a ring, that had belonged to his father, and it has his dad's initials inscribed in it. So Emmett put that ring on, and he got on the train with bright hope for a great summer with his cousins. And when that train arrived in Money, Mississippi, Emmett got off, and he found his cousins and began catching up and talking about life and how things had been, because they hadn't seen each other in a little while. And Emmett was bragging about life back in Chicago. In fact, he began talking about the girls, plural, that he'd been dating. He had pictures in his wallet of 2 young women, and both of them were white. And his cousins did not believe him. So on a dare, Emmett walked into Bryant Grocery Store in Money, Mississippi, where he bought a piece of bubble gum. And the record's not exactly clear as to what happened next. It may be that Emmett whistled at the clerk. It may be that he said something mildly flirtatious to her, or she may have made up the entire account. But whatever happened next, Emmett went home with his cousins, and 2 nights later, that woman's husband and another man came to Emmett's uncle's house. They broke in, they pulled Emmett from his bed, they put him in the back of their car, they took him to the outskirts of town, and they proceeded to beat him, torture him, completely undermine his dignity. And then they murdered him. Emmett was shot in the head. His body was tied to a cotton gin fan, which is a large piece of metal equipment, and they used barbed wire to do it, and then they threw that into the river. Now, after some heavy rains, a couple of days later, some boys were fishing downstream, and they looked out in the water. They saw something. They weren't sure what it was, so they went to investigate, and they found Emmett. He was unrecognizable at that point, but he still wore that ring. And so once he'd been identified, law enforcement officials put his body in a wooden box, nailed the lid shut, and sent him home to his mother by train. And when Mamie Till got that makeshift coffin, she demanded that they hold an open casket funeral for her son. Now, people thought she'd lost her mind. They thought she'd gone crazy in her grief. And they said, Mamie, you can't do that. Don't you know what the climate is out there? Don't you know what people are saying about this? Don't you know what people would say about you? You can't do this. But she stood her ground and she said, I want the whole world to know what they did to my boy. Emmett Till did have an open casket funeral, and thousands walked in front of him, and pictures were taken of his body, photos that you can still find online. They are gruesome. But those photos were published in many publications, including Jet magazine. And not too very long after that, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, someone asked her, what gave you the courage to go through with something like that? You know what she said? I couldn't get that boy's image out of my mind. She was talking about Emmett Till. Rosa Parks already agreed that this was a heinous injustice that was taking place. She was already on the side of ending it. But that day, on that bus, she sat down and that image flashed in her mind and she said, enough. No more. Men and women, I am asking you to help me, to help Scott, to help Life Training Institute, to help Summit Ministries lovingly and graciously open the casket on this human rights issue. Because I guarantee you guys, if we don't, America will continue to tolerate what is a Holocaust, and it will never have to look at it. Because like so many other things, abortion is hidden away. In this case, it's hidden behind sterile white sheets and a lot of fancy rhetoric. Now, there are some who will concede your science. Just as I pointed out, there are pro-choicers who agree with the science and what it says. But they'll stop you and say, we know that it's human. We know what the science said. We've known it all along, but it is not a person yet. That's beginning to sound a little bit familiar to me. Because what they're really saying is that there are some human beings who are merely human, while there are other human beings who have achieved some status of import, who are valuable enough to be considered persons or rights-bearing persons. In other words, some human beings matter more than others. We're back to square one. This is no longer a scientific argument, but it is a philosophical one. And it deals with the question, what is it that makes human beings valuable? In fact, if anyone asks you or tells you, this is not, it might be human, but it's not a person, your first question should be, please tell me, what is the difference? What is it that makes a mere human being a valuable person? Philosophy gives us two categories with which we can answer this question. One of those categories is that you might be valuable like an instrument. For those of you who are musical, you know well that an instrument performs for a purpose. It has a particular function that it does. So instrumental answers are going to be like that. They're going to deal with traits and attributes and abilities, functions that you have. There are many of these types of answers. The other type of answer that philosophy allows us is that you might be intrinsically valuable. Two I words, instrumental and intrinsic. Now this one is so simple, most people just reject it or they overlook it. It's so simple that what it says is that you are valuable in light of the very thing you are. In other words, you matter just because you are human. That's all. Let's look at a real-world instrumental answer. Dr. Peter Singer is a bioethicist at Princeton University, also over in Australia. But he has written a book called Practical Ethics that is used in medical ethics classrooms all around the world. And Dr. Singer would say that you don't become a valuable person until you are sentient. And what he means by that, roughly, is that you are aware of yourself and your surroundings, that you have some ability to desire or plan for the future. He's particularly interested in your ability to gain pleasure or avoid pain. So sentient in that way. Now, Dr. Singer knows full well that the unborn are not sentient in that way. He is an advocate of abortion. He is also very consistent in his view because he also knows that newborns are not sentient in the way that he defines. So in that textbook, Practical Ethics, Dr. Singer does write that newborns who have a particular kind of defect or something like that, if their parents aren't satisfied with them, they ought to have the moral right to talk with their doctor and kill their newborn. After all, it would mean more happiness for the people involved. They don't become sentient until around 28 days, give or take, after birth. Now, when drawing the line at sentience, that is the trait that he says answers the question, what is it that makes human beings valuable? He disqualifies whole other classes of humans as well as the unborn and newborns. He disqualifies anyone in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease who are not sentient, anyone in a coma, himself when he's asleep, me before I've had coffee, and that's not entirely a joke. See, that's the thing about sentience. It comes in degrees. It's one of the problems with it. So our question for someone like Dr. Singer might be, why is it sentience and not some other trait that gives us value? That's the grounding question. And then our other question is, to what degree do we need to possess that trait before we have value? Because it comes in degrees. That's why Stephen Schwartz disagrees. He says, no, intrinsic value is the only answer that makes sense. In fact, he says there's no relevant difference between the embryo that you once were and the adult that you are today that would make it okay to have killed you back then, but not now. In fact, Schwartz says there are only 4 areas of difference you can point out between embryos and us. I'm going to walk over here to talk about them because those areas are instrumental. Size, level of development, environment, that deals with where you're located, and degree of dependency. I'll walk through them again. But these are the differences that Schwartz says we can point out. None of them work, he says, to say you could have been killed as an embryo, but not as an adult. They don't matter that much. Differences in size. Some would say that the embryo is tiny, therefore it's insignificant. But since when does our size determine our value? Guys, we could play a game in this room called Let's All Stand Up. You guys can try it at home too. We'll start pulling out the measuring sticks and see who is the tallest among us. As a former gymnast, I can tell you, I am going to lose that battle. But as size is the thing that determines our value, we've created a spectrum, and that spectrum creates problems because what it says is that smaller human beings matter less than larger ones. My nephew AJ, once again, wouldn't stand a chance in a world like that. Level of development, the unborn are less developed than we are, that's true. But my son, Rogan, is 7 years old. He is less developed than every man in this room. I can't kill Rogan for that reason. But if you're going to grant it for unborn human beings, logic demands consistency. And it says you've got to be consistent across the human spectrum. Dr. Singer's argument, by the way, is a type of level of development argument. And some of those level of development arguments begin to sound very sophisticated on university campuses, things like consciousness, sentience, organized cortical brain activity. But again, our question is, why is it that trait and not another, the grounding question? And to what degree must that trait be present before we have a valuable person? And who gets to decide that? Environment, where you're located, the unborn are inside, we are outside. That is a difference, a geographical difference of less than 10 inches. Logic, being the tricky, consistent thing that it is, says that if 10 inches in a change in location can bring you into valuable humanity, then by the same reasoning, that distance can take you out. For those of you in the room here, be careful if you move to the next chair. But we just learned that we are the types of beings, substance types of things, that come into being all at once and have something that grounds our identity through time and through change. You guys could fly to the moon, and you would still be you. So environment doesn't do it. And degree of dependency, the unborn are dependent on their mothers for survival. That's true too. My mother is diabetic. She is dependent on medicine to help her body process sugar in a way that it can't. I cannot kill Debbie Talbert because she has dependency on something. But if you're going to grant it for the unborn, logic demands consistency, and you've got to be consistent. And what we find is that any time we give an instrumental answer, we create an unjust society in which some human beings matter more than others. The only answer that makes sense philosophically, the only place that there's any grounding, true grounding for human equality, is that we are intrinsically valuable. You count because you are human, and you share a common human nature with every other human being from the time they come into existence as an embryo to the time they die. And if Christianity is true, and I think that it is, long after that. That's really good news for every single one of us, every single person in the room, and every single person watching from home, in a world that demands that you think of yourself as functionally valuable. And all the temptations that we have day in and day out to define our value according to what they say. This truth should give you the ability to see straight through it and go, no, I don't buy that. In fact, we could ground it even further than that. On page 1 of the scriptures, that says that you are created in the image of the Most High God, the Imago Dei. Everything I've said today is grounded in the Christian worldview. Punchinello learned this lesson. One day, he met another Wemmick. Her name was Lucia. And Lucia got his attention not just because she was cute. See, Lucia did not have a single sticker. Not a single one. So Punchinello was naturally curious about this girl, and he began watching and noticing that the other Wemmicks noticed her too. And some of them looked at Lucia and they said, oh, look at her, she's different, that's so cool. And they went to put gold stars on her, but the stars would fall off. And some of the others looked down on her because she was different. They didn't like it. So they went to put gray dots on her, but the dots would fall off. And finally, Punchinello had enough. He said, why don't you have any stickers? She said, Punchinello, that's easy. I go see Eli every day. Now, Eli was the woodworker at the top of the hill. And so Punchinello became curious enough one day that he walked up that big hill and opened that giant heavy door and walked into Eli's workshop. And he heard a big booming voice that greeted him and said, hello, Punchinello. And I always imagine Morgan Freeman's voice because Morgan Freeman. There's an argument. And Punchinello said, you know my name? He said, of course I know your name. I made you. And Punchinello couldn't let it go. He said, I want to know why Lucia doesn't have any stickers. Eli said, oh, Punchinello, Lucia has decided that what I think is more important than what they think. The stickers only stick if they matter to you. And the more you trust in my love, the less the stickers matter. My favorite part of this little kid's book is the end. Because Punchinello doesn't fully understand. This is a gospel story. And that ending is all about grace. And grace is a tricky thing for us to understand. We don't get it either. That's why we have to be reminded of that gospel every single day, no matter who we are or what we've done or haven't done. But Punchinello walked out of that workshop and he thought to himself, I think he really meant it. and one of his dots fell off. One. Men and women, to the degree that we understand that we are human, that is established by science, and that we are intrinsically valuable, valuable in light of the kind of thing we are, endowed with the image of God, given that by him. We can't give that away, and no one can take it from us. To the degree that we understand that important truth, we begin to see exactly through the problems that the world puts on these types of issues like abortion. We understand that the unborn is our neighbor, bearing the same kind of nature that we do. And to the degree that we embrace that truth, you will become dangerous to a world like this one. So let me just warn you now. Dangerous in the best possible way. Because the world does not know what to do with people that it cannot define, that the stickers don't stick to. Those are the types of people who have the courage to stand up and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And every time you speak, I guarantee that you will instill courage in others. And the world will look on you like Punchinello looked on Lucia and wonder, what is it about them that makes them different? So I pray that that inspires you to stand up and make a difference when it comes to speaking up for our unborn neighbors. We are going to pause at this time, those of you at home, those of you here, to take a short break, and we will come back together for session 2 in just a few moments. Thank you so much.